This is Justice, History, and the Law. Lectures, discussions, and interviews from the Robert H. Jackson Center in Jamestown, New York. May 17th, 2003. Nancy Roosevelt Jackson sits for an in-depth interview providing deep background on Robert Jackson and his family.
That's okay. Now, your mother and father are who?
Archie, and mother's Gracie,
Okay.
Grace. And he was the next to youngest, Quentin being the youngest, who was the darling of their life, and they could never speak about him, and I could hardly do it, though I never met him without crying.
Right.
My grandmother, tears would run down her face. She never got over him, and it was the last, when he died, it was what he said, and she apparently had been thinking of it a great deal too, because they thought he was absolutely beyond belief charming, the way she was besotted, and so was he. And of course he was killed pretty soon, and it was very, and he lost all his boys there, didn't he? I think all but two.
Right.
And father came back, badly wounded, and went to a couple of other wars, so became even more wounded and worse, more peculiar. And it was tough.
Now, in your family, how many siblings did you have?
I had two sisters and a brother. The brother was Archibald, who was in the CIA and all kinds of things, and a great deal in the Mideast, and an expert on Arabs. We used to call them, that was his Arabs. He used to bring them for dinner, all these assorted people and strange in long robes and so forth. And I have several pictures of him. And I don't know if he was officially in the CIA. I can't remember that part, but I know he had something to do with it. He gave lectures on what we used to call his Arabs, and he really was a very well-educated person. He did loads and loads of books and spoke Latin and probably Greek. I'm not sure about the latter. I forgot. I'm getting so ancient. And he was terrible. He tried to teach me Latin, and I was rotten at it. And he gave me this book, and all the marks were all, this is terrible, this is worse, don't you, and so on and so forth. So I didn't want to be tutored by him too much.
And you had another brother?
No. I had two sisters.
Two sisters, okay.
And Theodora, who rushed on the stage and tried to be a ballet dancer, and to the horror of my parents, because she started quite late and wasn't too good. But her partner was, but we loyally went and sold tickets and did all those things. And her partner was Eolus, who who owned an art gallery, and he'd had quite a few years of it. So they danced around to the embarrassment and horror of my parents, but eventually she gave that up. And then she married Tom Keogh, who was a very well-known artist, Irish, whom I loved dearly, dearly, dearly. He was wonderful, and he even saw the ghosts of cats. And he was very handsome, very dapper, and a wonderful, wonderful artist. Alas, since an awful move because of Melinda, I lost some of his wonderful portraits. He was world-renowned. They didn't have much money when they were in Paris, so he did some, what are they called on the wall, frescoes? What do you do, painting on the wall?
Right.
And there's several, I think, one or two restaurants in Paris when they couldn't pay for their dinner. He did, artwork for them. And he was in Hollywood. He did the sets for Daddy Longlegs and other things. And I just loved him. Yeah. And he died of Legionnaire's disease, which was very rare, and it was a rare case, and everybody was quite riveted. But needless to say, we didn't share that interest in it. We were all heartbroken.
Oh, yeah.
And your other sister is?
Edie.
Edie.
And she married Barmin, the famous Russian general.
Okay.
Remember that story? And they parted because they were both rather temperamental, various reasons. And so the brothers, and one reason is that, I've forgotten to mention the real reason why, before they were married, I believe, I can't remember the end of it, he was married to a lovely Greek woman whom we liked very much. She lived in my parents' garage. It's very complicated. And he was, then he proceeded to have an affair with my sister, and he eloped with her. And her Greek brothers were twins, and they were furious at him and furious at the family. So they went to visit Archie one of them went and visited Archie and said terrible things, and my sister's been disgraced forever, and so on and so forth, and your sister, your sister was the cause of it. It was really a mess, and my brother was very gracious and charming, and said it's all right now and everything, and tried to soothe him down. And so then he left, and Archie gave a sigh of relief. And what would happen within a few days, a guy who looked exactly like him came and went through the same number, and it was the guy's twin. it was just appalling. So anyway, there was not very good feeling between the ex-wife and my family. Needless to say, my father was horrified that Edie had eloped with this guy who already had a wife. I don't think he was. I don't remember when he was married at the time. I don't think he married Edie yet. But anyway, it was kind of a big mess, and my father was further complicated. The guy was at Barmin, the Russian general, was about the same age as my father, which naturally father felt was more of an insult that he was going after his daughter. Right. This was sort of a tribal thing. He didn't like any of it. Of course, I have to say that Bill and I were all, we weren't very into it. We were more amused than horrified because it was so fantastic. It was like another person's story. It was another person's story. It was all so wild and cuckoo. And we lived in the garage where they had lived too, my parents' garage. They were all nuts.
Tell us about your schooling.
Pathetic. My youngest child is better educated than I am. They ran a school which mother and father ran. Father read us poetry all the time, and that was pretty okay, and Cloister in the Hearth and stuff like that. And what did they do? But we had an English master, as I say, had been fired from Groton, so we learned only English history. And he proceeded to fall in love with one of the girls at the school. And that was, of course, serious problems, because she was my sister's best friend. That was before my sister became involved. No, that was the other sister that was involved with Pauline. I'm mixed up. Anyhow, so that was kind of a scandal, and it was terrible because I was sent to a very old-fashioned school, which was not, I don't think, the best education, but I had absolutely no geography. I didn't understand fractions. I had a terrible background for it. The only thing I knew about was reading, really. I read a great deal, both by his grandmother and myself and the rest of it, so that I got through it. But I've had terrible luck to this day. Geography is kind of a mystery. I've never understood fractions that my grandchildren keep promising to teach me, but they never do. And, it's pretty bad, the kind of stuff that's been left out there. It's just awful, in fact.
We've all got
that I went on to college. It's very strange. I did. I went to Radcliffe and graduated cum laude, I think. I got honors and did advanced work in it, but I don't know how. I must have just concentrated on English or stuff that I knew. And I never wanted to do astronomy, but I was afraid to because of the math. So that, but I got through it very well. I did get to, I think I got cum laude and then something else, some other high honor, but God knows how. It's a mystery.
You mentioned Bill Jackson. When's the first time you laid eyes on Bill Jackson?
Oh, when I was at Radcliffe, they all lived in, there were all these guys that lived together, and they called it Club Hockabauk or something like that, some silly thing. And I just thought he was very charming. He was a lot of fun. They were very silly. There was this other guy, that Washington buddy of his, whose name I can't remember, who continued a friend for years. You'd think I could. And they were high-spirited. They were fun. They were not really very wild. They were hard-working too.
They were law students.
They were all law students, and they were all. I think so. There might have been one that was a Harvard grad. At this point, I can't really even remember, because I feel, anyway, stressed here. I can't remember the name of the guys there. There was one, I had a very good friend who was my roommate, and we used to go out double dating quite a lot. We went out quite a lot all together as a group, It was fun. It was really fun. And I was very impressed by Bill because he was very attractive. He was very good looking. He was very well read. And I liked his friends. They were just nice. And we had very good times. We weren't particularly wild or anything. It was kind of fun being in a group like that. It was like being in high school, It wasn't like...
When did he introduce the fact that he had a father who was a justice of the Supreme Court?
Oh, I have no idea. I just took it for granted.
You knew that, though?
Well, it wasn't such a big deal because I knew nothing really much about the Supreme Court. I just knew they were the highest court in the land. I didn't even know how many they were. I remember there was some argument that FDR wanted more, but I think that was later. And I was very unpolitical, it must have come as a shock to him because he was so intensely political. But he didn't seem to care. We had many other things to talk about. I liked the people he was with. They were very nice. And I didn't feel, the nice part was that with Bill, he was like his dad in that he was never patronizing, He didn't think it was bizarre that I'd had such a strange education. I didn't know math and knew nothing about politics. I was quite surprised about the justices. I mean, who they were. And so it didn't strike me as a big deal because I'd never known much about the Supreme Court. I just thought there were a bunch of old fogies up there. It didn't concern me because I was young and having a good time.
There you go. Now, you said he was political. Was he active in the party itself, or was he just sort of a student of politics?
I would say he probably helped his father, but I don't remember that much. I know that he was very involved with it. And also, let me see I think he did some kind of political work, but that I'm not sure of. And I don't know who'd know that. Who would know? The people you know. Who would you guess?
I have to think about that. I'm not sure.
I really don't know. Melissa, I don't know if she didn't. He probably did. I know he was very, in the Council on Foreign Affairs, and that was a big deal with him. As I said, somebody stole his portfolio, and he felt that it was a sinister thing, and I do too. Disappeared for quite a while.
Now, give me the time frame. When did you start dating him?
When I went to college. I don't know when that would. I got through school quite early. I think I got through college at about 19 or 20. I don't know. I went through in 3 years because my father was away at war, the Depression, and it would save the money, and I went to summer school.
Did you date? How long did you date before you decided to get married?
Oh, I had a hard time persuading him.
Ah.
He didn't want to marry at all because, he had a whole career ahead of him. But he was very fond of me, so eventually succumbed.
There you go. Now, was it a long period of time, 3-4 years?
Well,
courtship?
Let me see when it was. I guess it was shortly after he graduated from law school. I don't think, he definitely was not in school. He was in the Bureau of Ships. So maybe you know the date of that. I don't.
That's early. He graduates from law school in early 1944.
The expert here.
I'm the
He's
dates.
wonderful, isn't he? And so what?
And then I think you graduate from Radcliffe. He graduates and you graduate in that spring.
That's
summer
right,
period.
and I absolutely threw myself upon him, finally persuaded him. Neither family was pleased. That was really interesting.
Oh, really?
No, neither of them. My mother thought that, what did she think about him? She didn't think he was properly interested in me. He was probably, not proper in terms of proper, he was a proper person, enough interested in me. And she was a little leery of him because she thought that, because anyway, he was a Democrat, beyond the pale.
She didn't know about your Democrat roots?
No. Well, no, she didn't really care. Yeah. She thought I was a frivolous little thing. What difference did it make? And no, I always felt it from the very beginning because it was one of the things that I believed in. And they went to all the conventions and everything, and I was rather ignorant, very ignorant. Politics were not my thing. I liked reading English and flirting with the guys. It wasn't really. And I had a terrible time nailing Bill down, but finally I did. And so then I went to my mother, and it was terrible. I mean, it was great, but it was terrible too. In the first place, I don't know, I should tell that story about Mother.
Yeah.
This is private. This is private.
Anyway, we went down the train, and all of us, which was quite fun, quite an experience for me because we didn't travel much. And my mother had these old-fashioned underwear, these little panties that do up here with just one button, and she leaned up to get a suitcase. Of course, down they fell, and we were absolutely delighted, and we just couldn't have been more pleased. But she was very kind of spunky and insouciant. She's a bit like Melinda, but without the mean things, and like Melissa. She was pretty sure of herself, so she just merrily kicked it under the train seat. And I said, Mother, and she didn't care. Eventually she went, which am I supposed to put them on? I have no idea. I don't remember about the rest, but I was so shocked by this. But that wasn't enough. The Jacksons were giving us a huge reception to honor this great thing, to honor Bill and me. And they were not at all pleased with the marriage, as I said, because they thought that I was some society type, which was far from true, though I was like the guys and everything, but I wasn't terribly society, and impossible. And So they were not too thrilled either. In fact, they really didn't like the idea very much. And so the mother had the same thing happen at the reception. And again, she paid no attention at all. She just, kicked them under the table and continued, "How do you do, Mrs. So-and-so, or Justice this and that." And my mouth dropped open. I was nearly in tears. I was so disgraced by her. And I said to her mother after, "How could you do such a thing?" And she said, "Well, nobody cares. It doesn't matter." That was the kind of person that she was. And I just am not like that. But the reception was very grand, and my father-in-law was just wonderful to me.
Let's talk about your father-in-law. When you first met him, what was your first impression of then Justice Jackson?
Well, in the first place, I barely knew what a justice was, so that this was not a political feeling at all. And I cannot remember whether this reception came before or after I saw him in the horse. Mm-hmm. I think it came after, because I wasn't engaged to Bill when I used to go stay with them. Mm-hmm. This is an engagement party. And I just loved him. He was wonderful.
Talk about the horse incident.
Oh, that was so beautiful. It was so wonderful. I was quite thinking about it. Wake up terribly early to this day, and it was this gorgeous day in Hickory Hill, and so I rushed out. I have no idea what I was wearing, but apparently I was barefoot. I do remember that because I especially went barefoot, because it's the kind of day you want to, and the kind of place. And as I was walking through, sort of looking around and everything, out he comes from the woods part, sort of. I seem to remember wood in back, a little way back, and looking just so splendid, riding on his horse. I was tremendously impressed. Not because I barely knew what a justice was, but he was such a presence, And he greeted me very warmly, and he was like part of the horse. He had this beautiful carriage, very easy on the horse. Just so... and it was such a wonderful moment. It was like as though some hero had stepped out of the woods. I was very romantic about it, because he was a romantic person to me, always. Mm-hmm. He was down to earth, but very romantic. And his jokes was very accessible, and I never heard him say, well, once or twice, but I'm not going to go into, but I never heard him say a really mean joke about anybody. I really didn't, generally speaking. He was high-spirited, wouldn't you say so?
It's my impression, yeah.
He was high. I was very safe outside. But he was very...
Describe him. If close your eyes, and if you were to walk into the room, what would he look like?
That's a hard question. He just looked good to me. I don't know. I'm not terribly observant.
Is he tall? Or just size-wise?
Not particularly. He seemed to be very well built and very at home with his body and with himself, actually. He seemed very natural. It was definitely a presence. He was very alert. I felt that he noticed everything, but not in a way that I felt I was being watched. Mm-hmm. And nor was I particularly singled out, but just that he was aware of everything. He was conscious. He was very good about sensing people's moods, and he was very loving. It was really, really warm to me. We had real jokes. I used to call him Big J, because Bill, they used to call Bill Justice. Bill's buddies used to call him Justice, as a joke. And so I would call him Big J, Big Justice, but just BJ. And he used to sign himself BJ, I think, didn't he? You have the letters, BJ. And it was so sweet. This I don't think I'd like to see it, except in this group. It was so charming. When I had a baby, he said to me, signed it Big J, who feels himself now Little J. Yeah. Now the Little J, because I had a very difficult birth. My baby was so small I could have her in the palm of my hands. That was Miranda. She was a premature baby and lived and so forth. And he was very sympathetic during this, and no matter how busy he was, he'd ask about the baby and how I was and everything. He was a very good father-in-law, in fact, far more so than my own father, because he wasn't so bossy and overbearing. He was very gentle, but I felt somebody that I could go to about anything. He was a really humane person, really. And he didn't discriminate that I wasn't his daughter, though we never in any way, said daughter or anything like that, but I felt very much a member of the family, very much. And from the start, I just loved him. He was just so great.
What would be things that you might write him a letter or give him a call and talk about? What were subjects that you felt very comfortable talking to your father-in-law?
Almost any subject.
Mm-hmm.
He was really great. We talked about almost anything. Sometimes I loved it when he would tell me stuff like this. I mean, this would be more conversation. We know this one well about when he was in the court, that he used to send me these silly notes. Can you imagine? We'll say that whatever the question was would make such a fuss, and don't worry, I will get to lunch sometime. And I was quite pleased that, because it made me feel good to have these little pages come around and bring me notes, but I didn't think it was such a historical thing. I'm sorry I never kept them, because they were saying, I will be here, don't give this up, or it's amazing this guy can talk so long about such a silly stuff,
Let me set the scene here. You're in the audience.
Right, in the front, pretty well near the front, maybe even in the front.
And there's oral arguments going on.
In the Supreme Court.
In the Supreme Court.
Yes, and I get this, and one of the pages comes to me and gives me this little note saying, don't worry, we'll say lunch is soon, or did you ever know that whatever it was could make such a make such a fuss, be so important to anyone, and so forth. But it wasn't condescending at all. It was just friendly and funny, and he didn't do it all the time. He was quite serious. But I did notice at court, when people were disagreeable, he was very courteous. I mean, when some of the other judges were, he was much more courteous than they were. I would say he was underplayed, wouldn't you? From what you know, I mean, he didn't seem to crave attention, but he drew it naturally because he was such a wonderful presence. I think at least I felt from the start, and I knew nothing about politics and damn little now. So it was, he just was a presence, a benign, witty, entertaining presence. I mean, a real presence. I very seldom met anyone in my life except my grandmother Roosevelt, who had such presence. He was an extraordinary man, really extraordinary. And I was very, very happy. As I say, they had mixed feelings about my marrying, because my family were known as a bunch of kooks, so they were not really thrilled. But he welcomed me extremely warmly, and I really truly believed that he liked me from the start. And my mother-in-law was a bit more wary, because she thought I was going to be very social, which I've never been in any way. I wouldn't have had circumstances that would encourage it. And she grew to like me, but I don't think she ever loved me as much as he did. Mm-hmm. But I think that maybe she did. She just had a more reticent nature. She was not a chatterbox.
Did you get a sense that he felt comfortable confiding in you?
I do, very much, because I never would tell anybody. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Even though I was very indiscreet in many ways, I never would tell anything that he told me in the first place, because some of the things were very personal. It might upset his domestic life. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And he would ask me, indeed, the most inexperienced person, how I thought I would handle certain domestic situations and how I felt about it. It was terribly flattering to me, because I knew that he didn't do that with everybody. At least that was my feeling, that he didn't anyhow. I wouldn't have cared if he had anyone. All I cared about was him.
Right. Can you recall an example of what kind of topic that would be? You say a domestic situation.
Yes, I can, but I don't know if I should. But
too private?
Well, I don't know. I just know that he didn't. He didn't want to have his wife come, and that this was a great bone of contention. And
he didn't want her to come
to Nuremberg.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And that was something Irene wanted to go, or was this?
Oh, sure, she wanted to go.
Mm-hmm. And you wanted to go.
I wanted to go too, especially some of the CIA folks went. What was the name of that guy? What was the name of that guy who ran it to them?
Donovan.
No, then it was the CIA. There were some other folks that went that belonged to a government agency, and that I
was
felt.
It Francis Biddle?
Maybe he was terrible too. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm not biased, but he was a.
Right.
Quite.
So he's sort of discussing with you why he can't let you come, because that would mean...
No, he's just discussing with me. I didn't even... I kind of knew that was why. Discussing with me personal things about his domestic life that I don't think I want to go into. Okay. And...
without getting into it, there was we've certainly seen the movies and the pronouncement that he wasn't permitting any spouses of his staff.
Yes, I
to
know,
come.
because he didn't want her to come.
Okay, so that was the general.
I think that was true.
Yeah.
But though I don't honestly remember whether he said this or not. I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think he would have considered it disloyal.
Right.
But I mean, that's, I don't really remember that part, because that isn't the kind of things. Yes, if we did discuss it, I don't think I could discuss it now.
That's right. But theoretically, for personal reasons, he made a policy decision which affected a lot of his
Yes,
staff.
which annoyed people very much,
Right.
because they wanted to bring their wives. But, yes, I guess that's about all there is to say about that.
Now,
But he allowed them to go home to see their wives and so forth.
Right.
Anyway, some of them would have hated to have seen their wives. I can't remember that Playboy buddy of Bill's, but you remember him.
Vanitas.
Oh, no, yes, Vanitas too, but Vanitas wasn't into that. Vanitas was into getting contraband.
Right. The black market.
The black market. And he was always he was like a little, though he was a huge and powerful man, the dog bringing treasures to his, he was such a nice guy, really, though he was a total crook. And he kept bringing all these black market things and goodies and stuff, so that he kind of had to be reprimanded. Bill liked him very much, and the justice liked him too, because he was such an endearing rascal. He was a great big guy. He had twins. I went and saw his family once, and I liked them all a lot. I mean, when he came back
Right,
after
right.
Nuremberg.
And was the other fellow Larry Coleman?
Larry Coleman was just a runaround. His one interest was women, and plenty of them. And he just, as he said himself, he really had a great admiration for both Bill and, of course, the justice. And he carried around their briefcases, and he was terribly proud of this. And this is what he told me. He said, "I don't care if I don't have a job here. It's such a privilege to be here." He was kind of endearing, though he really was a scoundrel. Bill knew it too.
Did Bill actively seek an appointment to Nuremberg? Was that something he really wanted to do, or was that something that his father felt it would be good for Bill to do?
I think it was mutual. I think they both. He wanted. He was very interested, naturally, as he was really very proud of his father and very interested in his work, and he wanted to know more about it, because I think how could one help not want to know more
Right.
about it? The terrible things that happened in Europe. He wanted to be a part of it. I never heard him say, "I want to be a part of history. I want to learn more about history." But I felt he thought the way, and it seemed to me almost anyone would, except naturally my parents, who thought it was all ridiculous. But I was tremendously moved and impressed and thought it should be done, and it was the fair way to do it. And Bill did too.
Well, and hadn't Bill tried very hard to
Get in the Navy.
To get into the Navy?
Yes, but he couldn't, because he had terrible eyes. He was really, really, nearsighted. He wore them all the time.
Mm-hmm. While there, did he have a particular role that he wanted to play? As far as being.
If he did, he never told me.
Okay.
He just wanted to go over there. He wanted to be part of it, because he was very angry too about, the Jewish, what they'd done to the Jews, and he wanted justice, because that's why they called them both Justice, Big Justice and Little Justice.
Right.
He really did. He was passionately interested in the cause.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, passionately. It wasn't just about being important or being with his dad or supporting his dad. He wanted to have a part in getting those really wicked thing,
Did he sense any envy among some of the other prosecutors, just because he had his dad's ear?
Well, of course, you always had that with Biddle, who was just horrendous. I mean, he was really a mean man. He was horrible. I knew him. I knew them quite well, because I was a great friend of, I think it was his niece, Sheila Biddle. Not that she did nothing but worship him. She saw saying how great he was. Needless to say, I did not go into any of this with her. But and Biddle really was kind of nasty, because he was vying for FDR's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And he was really kind of nasty to Bill and kind of tried to put him down. And sometimes it was quite obvious. He was kind of snobby,
Mm-hmm.
and snippety.
Mm-hmm.
I never liked him either. And I don't really know whether he was able or not. I didn't know him well enough, because I automatically disliked anybody that did anything that
Sure.
even faintly about my father-in-law because I hate to say this, but I was a worshiper. I thought he was just wonderful, really wonderful. I've never met a person like him before. Never. He was so many facets. He could be such fun. He could be so witty, and then it could become, even though he was much in control, he wasn't a crybaby like me. He was just, because I get excited, and he was, even while he was changing whatever opinions, he was always in control. You could see he was angry and so on, but I never saw him really lose his temper. You probably know more about this than I do, John, but I never saw. And I saw Bill be very mean-spirited. Okay, if you have a rival and you both want to be president or whatever. My father-in-law was a gentleman, and Biddle was like some little yipping at his heels, you know. And I don't know what, I think it was because they were both vying for the President Roosevelt at that time, attention. Oh, and the wonderful story about my father-in-law is one time, when he came back, he was always very active, and he was chopping down some trees, and because it was very hot, he threw off his hat. And so I said, "Oh, you've got it in the ring already, have you?" We joked about that. And he was so pleased with that, and I was so pleased with it. I thought I was such a wit, and we had such a good time with it. I mean, I had a very good time with him. I really did.
Did your father-in-law ever talk about his political aspirations? Did he say that?
This is the closest he came to it.
Right.
That time we were just joking around. I would never have asked him such a thing because I didn't think it was my business. I think he possibly did, but it's totally a guess. And I don't. If Bill ever told me, which I would doubt, because he was even more, I would say, much more discreet than my father-in-law. I never heard it from anybody there, but I did hear the gossip that he was being groomed by FDR for this, because Franklin Roosevelt really was very fond of him, because he was an extremely engaging person. I couldn't emphasize enough how humane, how engaging, how slyly humorous, without ever being nasty. I did once, twice about one person in the court, but generally speaking, I didn't. And I think that's great. He's passionate in his beliefs. And
you can't leave us hanging out there. Who are the one or two persons?
well, I think I can, because I'd rather.
Okay, that's okay. But I had to ask.
Jack knows. Now I'm becoming so flustered. Jack over here knows. Oh, I really did love him so much. I must emphasize that about all. He was the most lovable, intelligent, never embarrassed about rushing out, and if a dog, made a mess all over the bed, he was the one that would take it out and not bother. And of course, so would my mother-in-law, but with great distaste. But he was so down to earth, and yet was so really spiritual and idealistic and so forth. It was such a wonderful combination. I've never in my whole life met a man I've admired more, really. And in my day, I've seen a good many of them. I've never seen anybody as balanced, as kind, as thoughtful, as interesting, and as well-read without showing it off at all. Very modest, and I never heard him say anything conceited. And he was terribly funny when he wanted to be. And I also loved the relationship he had with his Jamestown men buddies down there with that cabin or whatever they had, because they had so much fun, and it was something that the kind of thing my father liked to do, and my grandfather too, just like being alone. And I don't know whether they played games or what they did, but I think they hunted and fished and stuff like that. But it didn't seem like the boring stuff that I think most men do. It seemed that they had a wonderful relationship to me. I mean, maybe I idealized it, but and I never heard him say anything in spite of, I would say, a certain amount of acrimony that were among himself and some of the other justices. Once in a while I did hear him say a few occasional bad things, but generally speaking, I think he was a very benign person in spite of being passionate. Don't you?
Yes, it's very much
on
target.
I really do believe that, because I've heard such cuckoo things about my grandfather from my grandmother, and everybody worshipped him so much. I think this guy, the other was fascinating. My grandfather was fascinating, intelligent, witty, mercurial, and all of that. But this guy was a balanced, humane, humanistic human being. I mean, grandfather was a kook. He was a wonderful kook, but he was definitely a kook. This guy wasn't. He was very, very, very balanced and very fair. And to me, he towered over it was just exactly the first time, I think, that I saw him. It may have been the second, because we may have had the engagement party, but whatever it was, this was the impression in my mind of him riding a horse. It was so splendid, coming through the forest. It just seemed like a perfect metaphor for him, for his life and for himself and everything else. And the perfect one for my grandfather would be more, maybe like in back of making faces at the Japanese faces in front of them where they couldn't see him, or in back of them, I mean, rather. Or, riding more spectacular San Juan Hill, or, getting out there and go fooling around with things with the Navajos in a very spectacular way, whom we really did was a Navajo, they had made him one, or whatever you call it.
Right.
But my father-in-law did. I think he was a person who was extremely theatrical in a sense, but not flamboyant. It was only himself. And what did it was his quiet dignity and authority that seemed to come from, there were no histrionics about it at all. And when he was mad, but, everything was very, to me, it was subtle, but it was up front too. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
Okay, it's very clear. If you had to reflect back on the relationship you had with him, did he express, was there an area or two where he was, there were disappointments in whether his career, whether it was the Chief Justiceship, did he ever, were there a couple low points in his life that he shared with you?
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure he had extreme annoyance at some of his fellow judges. And I think that Franklin had tried, FDR, had really wanted to groom him for the presidency, and I think he was ready for it. I think he was getting a little tired of these unnecessary squabbles and some of his fellow justices, though I can't say that I heard him say, be mad at them and so forth, but I never heard him. He never was a person that really spoke behind people's backs about them. But I would say, yes, he was really ready to leave. He wanted that, and he was, I think that Cousin Franklin had decided, was going to take him off, and he was grooming him to be president. And I don't know what gave me that idea. Even I was terribly young and frivolous. I think even more frivolous perhaps now. And he didn't talk about that so much. In fact, he never talked about it to me. It's just things that I gathered from the fact that they were friends, that that the president was calling him up, and that he'd laughed and did not seem offended about my joke about the hat and the ring, and he even looked a little pleased. He had that kind of expression that you have, that slightly, sly but not sly in the sense that it's mean, but that he understood the joke, but he wasn't going to go into it. He appreciated the joke. That was the thing. He was a great appreciator. Even my silliest remarks, he caught right off. He was so witty. A lot of things that the relationship I had with him, a lot of things I didn't say, but I knew he knew it, that I loved him dearly, and I wasn't going to be sentimental and all of that, And I will never forget the loving, when I lived in Miranda's, Maynard was I told you, he was born in the palm of my hand and weighed under a pound, and the letters were so loving that he would take the time to write. I guess he must have been in Nuremberg then, was he? I don't know.
He was
back. But anyway, I didn't see him because I guess I wasn't in Washington. Was I? I don't know. I was at one point. I can't remember. But wherever I was, I just thought that he would take time off and really think about this and say in that humble voice that little J, if he's little J now, that this important supreme, even I who barely knew how many justices there were, especially as there had been some dissension with the president trying to make another or whatever. And, I just thought he was never patronizing, never thought of me as silly. The fact that I was ill-educated and this, that, and the other didn't make any difference, because I really believe that he saw people as much for their intentions as to who they were, I guess it is. And that I found very moving, that he knew what we aspired to, but were not necessarily that. And another lovely thing is that he knew Shakespeare absolutely, to the ground, and the Bible also, and quite frequently, not in an ostentatious way, quoted or made references to one or the other, which of course is what I was brought up on too, though not nearly as well educated.
I'm not sure I've ever asked you about him in a particular context. But the best man at your own wedding was Justice Jackson, right? Bill had,
Yes.
had his father. Just describe that. I mean, having...
Well, I don't know what to describe. He was just great. He took the ring or didn't take the ring, whatever you're supposed to do, gave the ring.
Mhm.
And it was we had a wonderful reception. We all laughed away. But I don't have much recollection because had made I had finally achieved this terrific goal in marrying Bill that I really couldn't concentrate and adjusted so much. Bill had all these ushers and so forth, and one of the ushers was this guy that tried to marry me for quite a long time, but also Mary. We talked about this. Roger Schaefer.
Roger Schaefer.
Yes,
Right.
who made a big tries for both Mary and me, and there's enough to divert me there, and I knew some of the ushers fairly well too, as they'd been part of Bill's entourage. Those guys I was describing.
Right.
So I was pretty busy, and then people getting up and making toast. He didn't appear at that moment. He wasn't very much in my life, but I have a wonderful wedding picture, which I think John has. Which he was there, and my grandmother was there looking very dignified. He was there, and this, that, and the other. And I think that he looks, I would say, I don't remember quite exactly his expression, but I think there's a touch of, I don't know, irony, but sense of humor there in his expression, don't you? What do you think he looks like? I think he looks not really skeptical, but close, not skeptical, but I wonder what this is going to be. And as I say, my mother-in-law was very much against it because she thought that I was frivolous and too young, and she didn't like my family were quite nutty, and she was very conservative, highly conservative. But Miranda, just another viewpoint, is Miranda is terribly fond of my mother-in-law and stayed with her for a whole summer, and she was a great person, but she and I were so totally different that I don't think she really liked the marriage. She was suspicious of my cuckoo family, and I think she thought I was very frivolous. That's my impression. She was very good to me, though, I hasten to say.
Justice Jackson dies in October of 1954. Prior to that time, did he convey to you any sense of that there was some real health problems with him?
I'm so self-centered that I don't think he ever said anything like that to me. In fact, I'm almost sure he didn't. But I think that I heard it from Bill and maybe his mother that they were disturbed about him. He never complained about any health problems to me or even mentioned them. I don't think he ever said to me, if I should die, would blah, would get this, that, or the other. And I don't think Bill said that much about me, though he did tell me he was worried that his father wasn't too well. And it was so wonderful in Nuremberg because I love seeing my father-in-law dressed up. He was such a dandy. He enjoyed it so much. This is his hat like this. And I was seeing him so simply dressed and not really liking it that much, but he had these, he really looked so dashing, I thought. And we used to see the movies, the television or whatever it is, and
did you see the newsreels then? You'd go to the movies and.
Well, I think so. Where else could I have seen
That's
it?
Right. Yeah.
It was, and also, of course, I know I must have seen it. Of course, afterwards we saw those terrible pictures of the Jews in the camps, and I saw the early ones of those because he brought them back, and I went and I was so devastated. It was horrible. It was just so disgusting, so horrible. And I'd never seen so much of the movies. He brought them back and showed them, and I was among the privileged to see it. And even though I'd seen it in the newsreels, it's nothing like what you really see. It was just so appalling and so terrible. We were all shadowed going out there. And what was great about my father-in-law, though he was deeply distressed, he had an air of, by God, we're going to get those bastards, and that's, we've gotten them and we're going to go after the other ones. I don't mean he said this aloud, but that was just his expression.
Now, during the Nuremberg year, did you stay in your own place, or did you live with Bill's mother?
Well, we did both. We started out with them, I think, and then we moved out, which I didn't like naturally, when living with her, because I was very much alone.
Right.
And then we had a little apartment in Georgetown, which I absolutely loved. It was right near the library, so I could spend hours there, and it had a little park near it. And then we had a few friends that came and visited us, which was fun, and I made lousy dinners, and we all laughed. It was fun. And Bill had a piano, which had belonged to one of the famous musical conductors, who naturally I've forgotten, Stokowski. Wasn't he a conductor?
Tchaikovsky?
No, Stokowski.
Stokowski.
Was that his name?
Yes,
Or one of
I
those
think so.
guys. Anyhow, so we had this lovely little piano, and Bill used to bang away at it, and we had great fun. He liked to play Paul Quarter a lot, and he was a Chopin. It was wonderful.
No.
And he really played very well, very well. He could read by ear wonderfully. And I don't remember his father having any of that, do you?
No, he didn't.
I don't think he
didn't play
ever had that education.
Right.
He used to get very exasperated sometimes. It was funny. Because when Bill was a playboy, I was all serious, but he did this around at Yale. My father got quite mad a couple of times, and he did have a pretty bad accident. He had a bad knee ever since, as you know.
Was it hard on you to be a Nuremberg widow? I mean, you went from being a newlywed and having this little.
Yes, I didn't like it at all because my mother-in-law and I were so totally different, and it wasn't too great being with my mother either. And and since though I had been alone a certain amount in Washington, I had only a few friends there.
Mm-hmm.
No, it wasn't too pleasant, but I mean, I knew that he wasn't in that much danger, and he wrote to me all the time. It was great, and called me up sometimes. And they were both very lovely to me, both his father. But my mother-in-law and I was totally at odds. I'd never learned how to iron, and I haven't to this day. I just don't buy clothes that need to be ironed. And she was a very good housekeeper, and she tried in vain to make me a better one, but I just couldn't get into it.
Right.
I would have liked to. Also, I had different ideas about animals, and I didn't believe in, cat being locked up with the horses, saying that this will make a good mouse and not feed them. I think that was barbaric and stuff like that. We disagreed about a lot of things. So I didn't get into arguments with it, but I felt that it was inhumane. I thought that she was very rigid in a small town. I don't know, but she had wonderful things too. I hasten to say she was a wonderful writer. She was totally, moral, whatever you would say in that. But she just seemed to me a little bit austere, sort of. But Miranda adored her. I don't think Melissa knew her that well. I think she always suspected me of being a debutante, which is about the last thing I was. I mean, I had been one, but it wasn't a big deal. Not as only mother's idea.
Yeah. And her own daughter had been a debutante, so the pot.
Excuse me?
Irene's own daughter had been.
Irene liked society. She thought that was fun.
Okay.
Even though she thought that I was probably. I know that she was not happy about the marriage, and I assumed this is just what I put into her mind. I thought that she thought the Roosevelt were kooks, and I mean this particular branch, and she was totally right. And as far as she thought that I was probably not intellectually up to Bill, and she was probably right in that too. So she had perfectly legitimate claims, and I never, in any way, she was too polite to say so. But you can tell when somebody's not thrilled with this, because Bill himself, I think, said to me something, But she was a very good sport about it, and she was always very kind to me, It's just we were totally different natures. Mm-hmm. I was really, I think, too silly for her. I just am that kind of person. A lot of things strike me as funny, but it did my father-in-law too. It didn't strike her as funny, I mean, if I didn't, I'd be miserable, since I'm just as sad as I am happy.
Right.
But I think that I really do believe, in fact, that he was the greatest man that I've ever met. Because, say, I knew quite a lot about my grandfather, but I didn't think he was a great. This was more rounded, I guess I would say. My father was a kook kind of grandfather. I mean, a sport, whatever you want to say.
Right.
Brilliant and interesting and well read. But this guy was. He wasn't a show off. He was a quiet in a way, even though it could be very. He was never. In fact, I never heard him raucous. He was a quiet, thoughtful gentleman, really. I don't know. Don't you think? Doesn't that seem a good thing about him?
Yes.
And he never. He was very modest about his past life, and yet never ashamed of it in any way. He was And he said funny things about it, but not taking off on it. Just if I made remarks or something about, did you do this, that, and the other, and it was so off base that he would laugh and say, oh, no, it wasn't like that at all. You know, that kind of thing. I mean, he never was hesitant about talking about it, but he never talked about it that much. It wasn't, he was more interested, I think he was more ongoing than looking backwards or anything like that. And he loved Hickory Hill, by the way. He really loved it.
After Justice Jackson died, did you continue the same type of relationship with Irene, or did you get a sense that your tie to the family was really through Justice Jackson?
I never thought about it one way or the other. I knew I didn't want to live with Irene. We were too different.
Right.
So I went back to my own mother, who I was not all that companionable with anyway. But what did I say that question again? I'll think about it.
After Justice Jackson died, clearly you had a relationship with him, a very warm relationship.
Very strong.
Very strong relationship. But that also was a connecting relationship with Irene as well, because
sure.
Married. Then he dies. He's out of the picture now. Did your relationship with Irene sort of just spread apart?
Yes, I would say so. But Miranda was still very fond of her, and I think went to see her. And if we were asked to any family weddings, such as the children, Bobby or Tommy or whatever, of course we always came and stayed with her, and we kept up with that to a certain extent. Miranda was particularly fond of Barbie. She really him a lot, and we liked it. Yes, I would say we did come back sometimes. And I don't think my mother really didn't care for Irene at all. She found her very provincial.
But wouldn't she come to New York and visit and write and send gifts to the girls? And
she sent gifts to the girls. She went abroad a good deal. After he died, if you remember, she was abroad a lot. She traveled a lot. I don't remember whether the girls came to see her or not. I think they did. I don't think I ever went down to see her. I don't remember it, but maybe I did. I did it, we'll say it's some birthday or anniversary or something like that. And of course we wrote.
Right. And would Bill travel to
Yes,
Washington
he did
to see
quite
his
a lot.
mother?
And she became ill, didn't she, and was in a hospital. And Mary didn't want me to see her for some reason. She was apparently in very bad shape. Bill didn't want me to come and see her. And I don't think I ever did. He never wanted me to. Why? I don't know.
I think she was
very, very sick.
Very sick, yeah.
She was incontinent and so
very
forth.
Very elderly. When she lived into her 90s. And
don't tell me about it. I'm not laughing. I'm just... Yes, no, she didn't want me. That's true, but not because of me. I never felt she was hostile. Though we were not buddies, I had enormous respect for her. She was very hardworking, very conscientious, totally loyal. But
let's go back to Justice Jackson and talk about his relationships with each of the children. Bill and his father, Mary and her father.
Well, they always kind of split up on that, and that Mary was the one that he went camping with him and stuff like that. She was his real pal, and he was his mother's guy. It was very much with his mother.
But the men obviously had the law. They'd been at Nuremberg together. I mean, during those adult years.
Well, also, the justice kind of teased him because Bill was very finicky. He would. He was. It used to drive me nuts too. In fact, I still have a piece of paper that says from a newspaper that I am not a control freak, because I said it was a control freak, and he was just so. That I still have this long piece of paper that I cut out from some paper. I put in front of the mirror. I mean, if we were going anywhere, time to go, and I might have asked some buddies of mine, and we were all sort of loitering around and fooling around. But Bill wanted to lead that procession, and and be sure we were on time, and was very thing. I didn't have that feeling with my father-in-law. In fact, I felt he was rather relaxed about that sort of thing. And my mother-in-law also had to apologize for me. I told you this story before, that Stuart, who was the handyman and did everything, came with us, drove the car, and came with us and ate with us. And she apologized, and I thought, what kind of a snob does she think I am, that I'm not going to eat with him? And I thought this was so strange, that, and then I thought afterwards it's not, because I don't think Mother would have. So I thought I can understand that.
Right.
that she definitely would not have.
Right.
So,
You mentioned Cousin Franklin.
Yes.
And obviously that's a huge topic of interest, but the particular moment I wanted to ask you about was that last inauguration. Do you remember
yes.
going and then...
Sure, it was raining.
It was raining, and it was at the White House, not
Yes,
at the
and I remember the
Capitol.
umbrella that my cousin and I fought over, so I can remember that. Clochette went. Yes, I do remember it, but I really don't remember what he said. What was it? What did he say?
Eleanor took you and Bill in to talk to Franklin.
Oh, wasn't that another time? No, she did that time too.
Yeah.
I've talked to him several times. He's just been very genial. Needless to say, we never said anything of anything. I do remember I guess he had died by the time my cousin was married. I'm not sure. Maybe he was there. I could just remember. What's her name? Cousin Eleanor.
Uh-huh.
And she was there, and then she and Father were telling a silly joke about the bees that I told her. That's why about the bees propagating. That's why there's so many sons of bees. And they were laughing away. And in the middle of this sort of holy moly wedding, religious wedding, and they had she was great, Cousin Eleanor. Even though they spoke of the family, my family spoke of it with scorn because of a newspaper article and running around the world and such. They held her in scorn, but you just couldn't help but like her. She was really so down to earth and so wonderful.
And what about Auntie Eleanor?
Oh, she was rather austere. Oh, my God, how bright she was. And she used to do photographs and then do all kinds of interesting things with it. And she was a needlepoint, a beautiful museum like my grandmother.
Wait,
embroidered.
which Eleanor?
We're talking about Cousin Eleanor, right?
Cousin Eleanor,
Oh,
okay.
who was Auntie Eleanor?
Franklin's wife.
No, it's the other way, isn't it?
Well, it's your family. I'm sorry if I'm confused.
I think it was Cousin Eleanor. I don't think I think Auntie Eleanor was Ted's wife.
Oh, okay. And Cousin Eleanor.
Cousin Eleanor was first lady, but she was my cousin. She wasn't my aunt.
Right.
Because
Right.
listen, I get all mixed up too. Poor old thing that I am. But and I don't know. I really liked all my family. I liked my cousin that would never get off a boat, whose name I can't remember now, at a square rigger, and they were a lot of fun. And the firecrackers we weren't supposed to use, and they all said to hell with it and had firecrackers all over the beach. They were kind of wild. That kind of part of the Roosevelt family. And the Roosevelt family, the two Roosevelt branches, the Republican and the Democrat, were said not to get on because they mostly played among themselves. But to me, they got on very well. They saw each other, they conversed with each other, they were quite jolly with each other. They said, there was always supposed to be a rift between the Republicans and the Democrats. Mm. And they would say mean things about Cousin Eleanor. But when she came round, they enjoyed her a lot.
The Jackson Center is a historical and educational facility dedicated to preserving the legacy of this country lawyer who became Solicitor General, Attorney General, a Justice of the Supreme Court, and served as Chief Prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials of Nazi war criminals following World War II. To learn more about this program, Robert Jackson, the Jackson Center, and upcoming events, the Jackson Center is located at 305 East 4th Street, Jamestown, New York, and found on the web at www.roberthjackson.org or contacted by telephoning 716-483-6646.